This week's Parsha is Parshat Tzav, and this Torah is based on a shir I heard from Rav Bernstein, and he bases his thoughts on the Sefer Oznaim LaTorah. It was written by Rav Zalman Sorotzkin, the Lutzkerov, and we'll see what he has to say. We're right at the end of the Parsha, Perek Chet, and what this Perek is dealing with is the Miluim, these special korbanot that were taking place only for these last 7 days. It was right before the Hakamat Mishkan, right in Nisan. And during these 7 days, and they're unique in that the halachas had never been seen before and were never repeated after, so that's that. Now, what happened at this time for these 7 days was actually Aaron HaKohen and his sons were being inaugurated, were having their status as Kohanim fully vested at this time. This is when that happened. And we see, again, we're in the 4th Aliyah, Perek Chet, and we see Moshe actually putting on the special priestly garments to Aaron. And we're in chapter 9, towards the end of Aaron's section. Vayasem et ha-mitznefet al rosho, right? And Moshe puts the mitznefet on the head of Aaron. Vayasem al mitznefet et el panav et tzitz zahav nezer hakodesh kasher tziva Hashem et Moshe. Now that last part is very interesting. Kasher tziva Hashem et Moshe, as God commanded Moshe. I mean, that seems like, that's what we assume. If Moshe is doing something, it's probably because God commanded it. But it becomes extra interesting when we just skip ahead 4 psukim at the end of Yud Gimel. What does it say? This is now talking about the sons of Aaron, right? Moshe putting the priestly garments onto Aaron's sons. Vayakrev Moshe bnei Aaron v'yalbishem kutanot v'yachkar otam avnit v'yachavesh lahem mikvaot kasher tziva Hashem et Moshe. So there you go. That's the second time. And again, we just keep skipping along to Yud Zayin. At the end of that pasuk, it says Kasher Tziva Hashem et Moshe, and we go to at the end of Chaf Aleph, and there you go. You see it again for the 4th time, Kasher Tziva Hashem et Moshe. Then if we go all the way to at the end of Chaf Tet, pasuk 29, Kasher Tziva Hashem et Moshe. So we see very repetitious. That's a very particular things to say, and the way Rav Bernstein fleshes it out is first, you don't need to say it. After all, we get it that Moshe is doing what God commands him, and even if you do want to say it, okay, then say it at the end. We get it. Kasher Tziva Hashem et Moshe. We understand that applies to everything that happened before, and there you go. So why do we have to hear it 5 times? So here's where, and when we first ask this question, it is important to realize that this actually harkens back to a question we likely would have asked in Parshat Pekudei just a couple weeks ago. Why do we say that? Because in Parshat Pekudei, it has that phrase, Kasher Tziva Hashem et Moshe, no less than 18 times. No less than 18 times. Right before Shlishi, we see in chapter 39, verse 21, at the end, Kasher Tziva Hashem et Moshe, and then 5 psukim later, 6 psukim later, it says Kasher Tziva Hashem et Moshe, Kasher Tziva Hashem et Moshe. We see that repeatedly, 18 times. That's a lot. What is going on there? That explains why we see this so much back in Parshat Pekudei and why we see it again here in Parshat Tzav. That's the question. And to answer this question, steps in the Oznaim LaTorah. And he has a fascinating parish to explain as follows. He says, Parshat Tzav, so we saw this now, I guess, several weeks ago. So Parshat Tzav is famous for not having Moshe's name in it from the time Moshe is born until the end of the Sefer Torah. Once Moshe is born in Parshat Shemot, straight through to the end, Moshe features in every single parsha, except for Tetzaveh. Now the Mefarshim explain that the reason why that is because Moshe at the time of the Ched Egel went to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and as the Jewish people were in a very precarious situation, to say the least, Moshe said, if you will wipe out the Jewish people, wipe me out of this book. I don't want any part of it. And even though it's true that the Jewish people, they ended up surviving and everything was, I wouldn't say everything was fine, but the Jewish people ended up being saved. However, when a Chacham says something, it finds its mark. And therefore, there was a partial fulfillment of this thing that Moshe said. And there's one parsha that does not feature Moshe's name in it, and that is Parshat Tzav. And fascinatingly, Rav Bernstein points out that this week, the week of Parshat Tzav, is the week where the 7th of Adar falls. Now, the 7th of Adar is Moshe's Yortzeit. So that is to say, the week of the Yortzeit of Moshe always falls on Parshat Tzav, where he is not mentioned. So you see Moshe is missing from that section of the Torah. Now, the Torah says, even though it's true that there are these dynamics at play, a Chacham says something, it finds its mark. However, all the same, do we not agree that Moshe only said it for the best of reasons? The only reason why he said Mechayim Sifrach was to save the Jewish people. That's not bad. So says those on the Torah, it seems reasonable that even it's true that the Kloa found its mark, his name is missing, and therefore he needs to be compensated as such. Now, Parshat Tzav, and we've spoken about this a number of times. So Parshat Truma talks about the gathering in, the tzivui, if you will, of the mitzvah of building the Mishkan. Parshat Tzav deals with the tzivui of making the Bigdei Kahuna, and Moshe's name isn't in it. Again, Tzav talks about the Bigdei Kahuna, and yet Moshe is missing. So what happens? How does Moshe get compensated? Well, when we think of Parshat Vayakal and Pekudei, we just kind of, sometimes at least, many people just be like, yeah, that's when we built the Mishkan, and that's not entirely accurate. It's true that Vayakel deals with the building of the Mishkan. However, Pekudei deals with the creation of something else, and that is the creation of the Bigdei Kahuna. That's what's happening in Parshat Pekudei, and that's why we see Moshe's name in there repeatedly, because we don't want Moshe to be missing from the special mitzvah of the tzivui of the Bigdei Kahuna, and therefore to compensate him for his absence from the Bigdei Kahuna in Parshat Tzav, we give him 18 explicit references so we can associate Moshe with the Bigdei Kahuna in Parshat Pekudei. That's what's going on. Now, what's interesting is, again, going back to Parshat Tzav, where Moshe's name does not appear, it actually deals with two general tzivui. The first tzivui, of course, we said, was the making of the Bigdei Kahuna, but it also spoke about something else. There's also the tzivui for the 7 days of the Miluim. And that's why, says the Oznaim LaTorah, we have this Kasher Tziva Hashem et Moshe 5 times over at the end of this week's parsha, as we're dealing with the korbanot of the Miluim. That's there because you want to make sure that Moshe's name is associated with those special korbanot, which he was not able to be in Parshat Tzav. Now, actually, there's more, says Yosnam the Torah. There's actually one last thing that is dealt with in Parshat Tzav. It's only a passing reference, but it's still there. Again, generally speaking, we're dealing with the Bigdei Kahuna and the Miluim. Was there anything else? And the answer is yes. Just look up. We are at literally the first two psukim of Parshat Tzav. What does it say? V'atat Tzav et bnei Yisrael v'yikchu elach Hashem en zayitzach katit lamor la'alot ner tamid. Now you shall command the children of Israel that they shall take for you clear olive oil crushed for illumination to kindle a lamp continually. This is the first reference we have to the mitzvah of lighting the menorah, and Moshe's name is not mentioned here because again it's Parshat Tzav. So what do we do? So let's look at where the Torah talks about the treatment of the menorah at its fullest, and that is in Parshat Beha'alotcha, right at the beginning. So what does it say? Vaydevar Hashem Moshe le'emor, classic opening. Daber la'aron v'amarta elav v'alotcha et hanerot el mul pnei hamenorah ya'iru shivat hanerot. Right? Speak to Aaron. Again, we're at the beginning of Parshat Beha'alotcha. That's chapter 8 in the Sefer Bamidbar. So speak to Aaron and say to him, when you kindle the lamps toward the face of the menorah, shall the 7 lamps cast light. Vayasken Aaron el mul pnei hamenorah hela nerotea kasher tziva Hashem et Moshe. Aaron did so toward the face of the menorah. He lifted his lamps as Hashem had commanded Moses. There, says Oznaim LaTorah, for every reference there is to a mitzvah that Moshe was not, for a mitzvah in Parshat Tzav, where Moshe's name does not appear, the Kasher Tziva Hashem et Moshe appears in the 3 different areas, both in Pekudei and in our week's Parsha and Tzav, and even at the beginning of Parshat Beha'alotcha, to associate Moshe's name with those specific mitzvahs that did not have the privilege of being associated with. We will end it there. And Shabbat Shalom and Chag Sameach.